Okay, so with Chris, we're going to go into some of the fundamentals of the deadlift. The deadlift generally is intended for very heavy lifting, where we're putting a tremendous amount of stress on the nervous system. Usually rep ranges are going to be somewhere between 2 and 5 or 2 and 6. Now when you're learning the deadlift, doing your maximum attempt is probably not advised.
Not day one.
But we will go over some basic fundamentals of a good quality deadlift so that we can start to ensure some safety. And as your skill improves, so will your ability to go heavier, and we'll go from there. So first things first, you can do a deadlift, a traditional deadlift, which will be done with a barbell. You can use a kettlebell, you can use a dumbbell. Anything where you can hold a lot of weight near the floor, lift it up off the ground and set it back down is essentially going to be a deadlift. So for our purposes today, for simplicity, we're just going to use the kettlebell as the medium to demonstrate the deadlift. But keep in mind, once your skill is refined and you're confident, the idea is to go heavy with the deadlift. All right, Chris, so first things first, with the kettlebell, I want you to stand on either side of the kettlebell. And I want you to move forward so that the handle of the kettlebell is cutting your feet in half. Good. Now that's also where you would approach, or similar to where you would approach a barbell. So if you're going to do a heavy deadlift, or a light deadlift for that matter, with a barbell, you want the bell as close to your center as possible, as close to your spine as possible. So the barbell, you can imagine, might be touching the front of his shins. And then Chris, if you want to take a step forward even 1 inch, we'll be able to see there that handle of the kettlebell is right in front of your shin. That way, when you bend down to grab a hold, it's going to be in the most favorable position. Biomechanically, it'll be the most favorable so that you can generate the most force and therefore move the most load. We good with that? All right. So now in the deadlift. With the deadlift pattern, it's a little bit unique from the squat, mostly because of two things. Number one, the weight is going to be below you. Generally, it will start from the ground. Whereas a barbell squat is generally above the navel, back squat or front squat. So the weight's going to start from the bottom up. The second thing is that the deadlift is more of a hip hinge rather than a squat. Chris, can you push your hips back and show us a good hip hinge? Keep going all the way. So just stay right there. So you're going to notice that if his arms are dangling straight down and they're nice and relaxed, they're approaching the handle. His hips are way behind his foot. He's keeping a nice neutral spine that includes his neck position, thoracic and lumbar position. You'll notice that most of the joint angle is happening at the hip. There is some at the knee and even less at the ankle. Come on back up, Chris. As opposed to a squat, that if you go ahead and squat down, Chris, the angle of the knee and the hip are very similar. Go ahead and stand up. So that's a squat. So again, a deadlift is a hip hinge. Those words are more or less interchangeable. So Chris is going to move his hips back. As he moves the hips back, he's going to start to tighten his torso just a little bit for protection. Eventually, Chris, work your way all the way down until those hands find the bar, or in this case, the handle of the kettlebell.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question here that I have about the deadlift.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when I'm doing a deadlift, I do barbell. You can see that when it dangles, it's just dangling right here, right?
No, you're going to notice when you see this video that your hands right now are actually well in front of your shoulders.
Exactly. And so, oh, they are.
Yeah. So we actually, if we were to drop a plumb line from your shoulder, if we were to drop a plumb line from the back side of your shoulder, it's going to hit that kettlebell.
All right.
The other thing, that's a good question. So the other thing too, though, is before you lift up that weight, if you'll set it back down but keep your hands on the kettlebell, what I want you to do before you actually do any movement is set your body. So I encourage my clients to do the work before you do the movement. And here's what that looks like. I want you to take your shoulders and pack them as hard as you can. That means that you push them away from your ears or towards your hips. So what you do is you really fire up the latissimus dorsi, the posterior deltoid, the long head of the tricep, and that drives the shoulders down. And we'll see right now your arms are perfectly vertical. The weight is right underneath your shoulders. Hips are way back. You still have a nice neutral curvature in the spine. Go ahead and let go and stand up just for a second so you can breathe. So when you're in that position, we want to create optimal stability in the lumbar spine and the hip complex. Now the lats attach to the lumbar spine through the thoracolumbar fascia. So if we can get those lats highly involved, highly engaged, we improve the stability of the lumbar spine. There's certainly more to it than that, but that is one big player. So Chris, go ahead and take it down again. Once you're in a comfortable position.
So I'm going to try to restart my question because oftentimes once I have the weight in the air, I will notice that like I'm trying to do a hinge at the hips and not be very squat-like in my hinge. And what ends up happening is because I'm like trying to mostly hinge, I'm like my weight's up here.
Yeah.
Like below my shoulders because there's a lot of gravity pulling on it. And my understanding is it's supposed to be right against the shin essentially.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like I don't know if I'm not getting my hips back far enough or what.
Well, if you have a heavy weight and you try to lift it up, the weight will move underneath you where it needs to be. If you hold that weight out in front of your shins in a hip hinge and it's heavy enough, you're going to fall forward. You don't have a choice.
Okay.
So
even
if your starting position is compromised, but in the way that the weight's too far out in front of you, when you begin to pull that weight off the floor, the first thing that's going to do is it's going to swing back into the perfect position.
Okay.
You'll notice it. Go ahead and step back 6 inches. All right, show me a great hip hinge. Grab a hold of that kettlebell. And you see what happened there? The first thing you did is it pulled right back underneath.
It's hard to show you because I can't do what I can't do, but like right now I think that my kettlebell is pretty close to in front of my shins.
It's perfect.
If it was a bar, the bar would almost be touching my shins.
Yep.
But I can go like this too. And my kettlebell now is still underneath my shoulders.
Sure.
Because of gravity. But now it's like way out from my center of gravity.
It's way out from your center of gravity, and that's fine with this weight. But if you have a heavy enough weight, you would not be able to sustain that. Like for example, if you pulled your personal record, it wouldn't be in that position. The other thing that I want you to do when you do your deadlift is I want you to sit your weight back into your heels. I want you to sit. That doesn't mean that you are not putting any weight on your forefoot, but the majority of your weight is being bared through the heel relative to the forefoot. And as you do that, that will help you sit back as much as you can. I want you to get that sensation that you're almost going to fall backwards.
Okay. I asked the question, and hopefully it doesn't lead to a boring video, but I asked the question because I think deadlift is such a great lift, and I also think that there's potential for harm there if you do it wrong. And so I want to make sure to like point out some of these little things for people that are watching this. That's the whole point of the video.
Yeah,
so
and the farther I should say that weight gets out in front of you, the greater the stress and the shear forces are going to be on the lumbar spine.
Right.
And you'll feel it. You'll feel it. So that's I'm glad that you asked that question. It's very common. The other thing I teach people in the deadlift, since it's exactly in line with what you're talking about, is as you begin to pull that weight up off the floor, I want you to imagine that you're pulling it into your body or toward your body. So if you'll go down into your deadlift position, find your feet in the right place first, Chris. Drop down into that deadlift position. And when you pack the shoulders, I also want you to imagine that you're pushing the handle backwards or towards your hips as you pack the shoulders. Lock those elbows, flex the triceps hard. Show us your triceps. Good. And so now as you begin to lift, I want you to pull it toward you as it rises upward. That will continue to activate the long head of the tricep, especially the latissimus dorsi and those muscles. And then just drop your hips straight back, and you're still pushing backwards in a sense with your hands. That's a beautiful position right there.
So this is comfortable to go this slow, and then I don't know how to go all the way to the ground.
All right, so you can either hinge and bend more, or you can get a little bit more squatty, because you still have a window.
I don't have any more hinge unless I move my back.
What if you push your hips up? Then your shoulders might go down.
Like this maybe?
There you go.
Oh,
So that right there is almost like a stiff-legged deadlift, and you're going to notice that there's a window. There's a window in the deadlift. What I mean by that is how high should your hips be. So if you'll go ahead and drop down again, grab a hold of that kettlebell handle. Good. So just don't move it, but stay in that position. So what we want to look for are these three landmarks. Number one, the shoulders are above the hips. And right now your shoulders are above your hips barely. So this qualifies. This would be considered a stiff-legged deadlift. Sometimes it's referred to as a Romanian style deadlift. Now go ahead and bend your knees and drop your hips a little bit more. This is still a deadlift pattern. This is going to put a little bit less load in the hamstrings, right? Go ahead and drop your hips a little bit more. This is still a deadlift pattern, but now barely, because the hips are above the knees, but barely. Squat down 2 more inches, and now we're into a squat pattern. So push your hips up, stop. That's a deadlift pattern. Push your hips up more. That's still a deadlift pattern, and you're just going to have to find what is your sweet spot. Go ahead and let go and stand up. If we were to watch 10 professional competitive deadlifters, we would see 10 slightly different techniques. But the one thing that we will see is the shoulders are always above the hips, and the hips are always above the knees.
Got it.
So there's that triangle.
Okay.
Good?
Mm-hmm.
All right.